Well, as we would say in New Zealand, kia ora everybody, hi. I'm Jill Evans. I'm a regular on the WDI weekly activist meetings along with Janet, who is our country contact, who's also on this Zoom meeting as a participant. So I'm also the National Secretary and co-leader of the Women's Rights Party of New Zealand, Aotearoa. And today I'm going to talk about a very low point in our history in New Zealand and how that became the catalyst for action. It's not the whole story of what happened in Auckland, New Zealand's Albert Park and the aftermath. For that, you'll have to wait till we get our book out that we're producing. Ah, I don't know why my slides are not. Oh, there we go. So by the time the 25th of March 2023 came around, we'd all been watching events in Melbourne the week before and then in Hobart in Australia with Kelly J. Keen's Let Women Speak events. And it was obvious that the Auckland event was going to be a total riot. As it turned out, New Zealand's Day of Shame saw the birth of New Zealand's first women's rights political party in 40 years. We were angered, we were bitterly disappointed, we were embarrassed in terms of the rest of the world. We were traumatized by the violence we experienced at Albert Park that day, but we stood up and we fought back. The same day, my friend Dawn Trembeth and I founded the Women's Rights Party that 7 months later would contest the general election as a registered political party. Dawn and I were both already sex realists as part of a small secret group of women within the Labour Party. With our friends, we watched with dismay as the New Zealand media was whipping up anti-Posy Parker hysteria, calling her a Nazi. This wasn't helped by our Labour Party leaders publicly condemning her. There were attempts to prevent Kelly J from entering the country in the week before Albert Park. These trans-allied groups filed a last-minute judicial review in the High Court challenging the Immigration New Zealand decision to allow Kelly J's entry into the country. But on the Friday before Albert Park, the very next day, the High Court Justice dismissed the case, saying the decision was not unlawful. The Rainbow Greens had urged the Immigration Minister, Michael Wood, to bar Kelly J's entry into New Zealand, saying it would put the safety of trans people at risk. He condemned Kelly J's inflammatory, vile and incorrect worldviews, though he said he was powerless to prevent her from coming. As you can see from the placards of the trans allies, they were supposedly all about love and peace. As staunch Labour Party supporters, Dawn and I were incensed by Michael Wood's dismissal of Kelly J. His use of incorrect worldviews smacked of authoritarianism. And the whole idea of the Let Women Speak events was the opposite, to hear from ordinary women in a public space having a say and defending their hard fought for rights. Nothing could be more democratic. The then Deputy Prime Minister was also widely condemned her on social media, as did our Minister of Justice, who joined the fray with a call to action. Let's do what we do, Aotearoa, stand up, make some noise and support our trans whānau by showing up and drowning out bigotry. The Green Party also put out a call to their members to join the protest, signed by their leading MPs. On the day, there was no sign of the police, even as the protesters were moving towards where we were in the fenced-off area. There were only a few of us and thousands of them. We felt like we were sitting ducks. The anti-Posy Parker protesters were making an incredible noise with whistles, horns and loud hailer sirens, pushing against the barriers, intimidating and threatening us. As we waited for Kelly J to arrive, the protesters got more and more emboldened. They were pushing and pulling on the barriers. Then all of a sudden, they broke through. They were aggressive and intimidating. Their action and bursting through the barriers resulted in an assault of a 71-year-old woman who was there to hear Kelly J speak. A police officer later told the Independent Police Complaints Authority he hadn't expected the rainbow community to be so aggressive. Her attacker was subsequently charged with common assault but got off without a conviction. A protester threw a substance over Kelly J that turned out to be tomato juice, but they didn't know that, of course, at the time. Kelly J bravely stood her ground, live streaming the fracas from the rotunda. Kelly J was saying, "Where are the police? Where are the fucking police?" People in the park and those watching online frantically called 111, our emergency number, to get the police to come and help get Kelly J and her supporters from the rotunda to safety. As can be seen on video recordings later that day, the police were there at Albert Park, lounging around in vans or under the trees well behind the protesters. They had stood by as Kelly J, her marshals and security guards pushed their way through the baying mob. Kelly J later said she thought she was going to be killed. Dawn and I spent the evening talking to each other on our phones. Like me, she was a very active Labour Party member in Auckland. She was a Labour member of a local board and chaired the Auckland Local Government Committee. I had been an Auckland regional rep on the National Labour Party Council. Dawn and I ran the South Auckland Labour Hub with another woman, and I was the chair of my local electorate committee. I had twice been a Labour candidate in local body elections. We both had spent countless hours delivering leaflets, phoning voters, knocking on doors to get out the vote for Labour, and much, much more. We were furious with our Labour Party leadership and the role they'd played in helping hyping up the opposition to Kelly J. That night, I resigned from the Labour Party and Dawn resigned the following Monday. Our conversation turned to who we would vote for in the election later that year. We couldn't vote for Labour. The Greens were just as implicated in causing the violence by putting out the call to their supporters to come and protest against the bigots. Could we vote for National, which is our Tory party, or ACT, our equivalent to UK Reform Party? That was a step too far. Could we simply not vote? Then no one would know why we weren't voting. So we decided to start a political party to give women disillusioned by the mainstream political parties an option to vote for a party that stands unequivocally for women's rights and against all forms of violence against women and children. That night, the Women's Rights Party was born. Many of us who had been involved in political parties of the left felt betrayed by our leaders. We'd watched in horror as these leaders wholeheartedly supported the trans mob before and after Albert Park. We had lost our political homes. We couldn't vote for a party that didn't respect our right as women to speak about women's rights. So within days of the Auckland's Let Women Speak event, 20 women from all over the country attended a Zoom meeting to discuss a proposal that we put out to set up a women's rights party. We resolved to go ahead with registering the new party in time for the general election, which was to be held in October 2023, just 7 months away. The women burst into action. We needed to sign up 500 members, so of course we started with our families and friends. We wrote a constitution and a policy platform for the election, which we based on the Women's Declaration International. And we signed up to that. Another woman set up a membership database, and 2 of us set out to get a bank account. We designed a logo and printed off 5,000 copies of a flyer, came up with a media strategy and developed a website which went live in the first week of May. We also, as you can see here, occupied the band rotunda I think it was the 7th of May. So we made merchandise to raise funds for the election campaign and promote our Protect Sex-Based Rights messages. T-shirts, tote bags, rosettes, badges. Some of us got our knitting needles out, busy making suffrage scarves to sell. My sunroom became the women's right registered office and storeroom. Just 6 weeks before the election, we were confirmed as a registered political party. We decorated my van with our election slogans and took it all around New Zealand, setting up local action groups. Women all over the country got active. Women in small towns and cities were relieved to find there were others who felt as they did about these issues. They shared their peaking stories. We handed out placards that could be used for sign waving on street corners or nailing on fences. Everywhere we went, we talked to people in the street and left flyers in toilets and cafes. At meetings held all over the country, we elected regional coordinators and 12 candidates who are willing to stand on our party list. Quite a courageous thing to do because you have to be out there. They included an international whitewater kayaker, a provincial cricketer, a former college, chief executives of the College of Midwives, a leading feminist economist, and New Zealand's first woman trades qualified cabinet maker. We hung purple, white, and green ribbons on trees all over the country. This slide is Christchurch. In Dunedin, we tied ribbons to the lamps beside the Robbie Burns statue in the Octagon. A year later, we found these were still flying. We encountered random strangers along the way who were overwhelmingly supportive that we were standing up against the gender madness that had engulfed our society. In one small town, a woman drove by, spun around and pulled up behind the parked van. She raced over and said, "Thank goodness someone has some sense." Everywhere we went, women shared how they'd been moved to join the party by their shock at the violence of the trans allies on the women at Albert Park, which they had watched in horror from Kelly J's live stream as she and other supporters were trapped in the Albert Park rotunda. Our youngest candidate, Mackenzie Clark, a business student at the time, is seen here speaking at the Let Women Just Speak Justice New Zealand event that we held in St Patrick's Square in Auckland on the 20th of September. By the election in October, we had more than 600 financial members. More than 2,500 people voted for us, despite a complete media blackout by the mainstream media. To be elected to Parliament in New Zealand, a party must either reach 5% of the votes or win an electorate seat. These are very high bars, which we didn't get there, of course. We held suffrage events in September, just before the election. In Auckland, members dressed in Victorian clothes and they hung banners over a motorway bridge. They later joined with a National Council of Women's Suffrage Day celebration. The NCW organisers were less than happy with our presence. They insisted we remove our placards as NCW is non-political. Wellington members handed out cake to passers-by to celebrate women winning the vote 130 years before. A group of trans activists hunted us down as we moved from our cake stall to join a lesbian action for visibility Aotearoa Lava protest outside the Ministry of Women's Affairs. I took a photo of a well-dressed man who was yelling and screaming at Lava members, and I posted it on my Facebook. He turned out to be a member of the judiciary and later apologised to his colleagues on his social media for having lost it. The trans activists accused us of appropriating women's rights, believe it or not, as we moved onto Parliament grounds where we planned a symbolic suffrage action. I was to chain myself to one of the historic gates of Parliament But the presence of the protesters alerted security and we were all moved on. A small group of us returned and held our suffrage banner below the statue of John Balance, a supporter of women's suffrage, mainly because his wife was, and he died in 1893, the year New Zealand women won the right to vote. We knew we wouldn't make it into Parliament given the short run-up, but that's why we stood. By registering as a political party, this meant our logo and name would be on the ballot paper in every polling booth in New Zealand. We had given those women who could no longer vote for Labour and the Greens a choice on the ballot. Building party organisation around the country with members getting actively involved laid a foundation for the party going forward. The following month, I stood as the Women's Rights Party candidate in a by-election held because a candidate from another party had died during the run-up to the general election. Importantly, the general election and the by-election were opportunities to draw attention to our issues as women because things in New Zealand had been dire. Largely under the radar, lobby groups funded by the previous Labour government pushed an agenda that put the rights of women at risk. Millions of dollars in government funding had gone into NGOs that were having huge influence throughout the public sector, including in our health and education systems. When women shared their concerns in 2021 in submissions to the Select Committee considering the bill to allow men to change their sex on their birth certificate, the submitters were treated with absolute disdain by the Labour Greens women MPs. Most submitters were opposed to sex self-ID, yet the bill passed without a single dissenting voice amongst the MPs, not from the left and nor from the right. New Zealanders can now change their sex online as many times as they like. Policies have been changed in council-owned facilities such as swimming pools, in workplaces, in women's refuges and rape crisis centres to allow men pretending to be women to access women-only spaces and services. At the same time, women's voices have been shut down in our universities, our public institutions, the mainstream media and our unions. Jobs have been at risk if anyone dares to question gender ideology. In the name of inclusivity, women have been excluded from public debate and our rights eroded. The words women and babies were erased from the language of midwifery. We were referred to as birthing people. Organisations promoting women's health replaced women with cervix havers and menstruators. Breastfeeding became chest feeding. Women all over the country are active in resisting gender education, saving women's sports, petitioning Parliament, lobbying, writing submissions, and raising issues in the media. We even made it on TV1 News this year, twice in 1 week, which is quite amazing. One of our members is running a petition to have the suffrage flag fly at Parliament on Suffrage Day. They fly the pride flag at Parliament all year, but don't even run it on our own day commemorating women winning the vote. The first country, I might add, in the world to do so. Another of our members is running a petition to make Suffrage Day a public holiday. Our presence is felt on Facebook, X, and on our Substack. Oh, of course, we've got a website too. We are seen as a threat by trans allies who seek to discredit us. They tried to seek out dirt on me and label me as anti-trans on Wikipedia. Every time it's changed back to women's rights advocate, within 15 minutes they change it back again. I've given up. Therapists and counsellors have been hauled before their professional bodies because of complaints by these same, see, Paul Thistle, the same vicious ideologues. We won't bow down in the face of gender identitarians, as I like to call them. Again, in 2024, members held suffrage events in Wellington, and here's our sisters in Manawahine Kororo, along with some of our members, who ran the suffrage event in Wellington, but we also did the same thing in Auckland. We joined up with Speak Up for Women, who organised a protest outside the German embassy when the German government enacted sex self-ID, as our government had done in 2021. In fact, we were the first country in the world to protest on that day because of the time change. In 2024, we ran a successful tour of Sal Grover of the Giggle vs Tickle landmark case now in the Australian Federal Court, highlighting why it's so important to keep women's sex-based rights in anti-discrimination law, as our Parliament is set to consider whether gender identity and expression should be included in the New Zealand Human Rights Act. We had booked a room in a women's centre in a provincial city where Sal was to speak. At the last minute, they cancelled, saying others who used the centre would feel unsafe with our presence. Calls and emails, followed by legal letters from the Free Speech Union, fell on deaf ears. We relocated to another venue and told only those who had tickets where we were. Anti-women protesters planned to disrupt and shut down the seminar we were holding at Victoria University in Wellington with Sal. The protesters planned to drown us out with loud hailers, whistles and shouting inside the building. We got wind of their plan and shifted to another venue. We emailed ticket holders to alert them of the change and told them, come an hour earlier. The protesters gathered inside the university venue, watched by a member of our organising team, eventually realised we must be somewhere else, and they hunted us down. By then, we were safely ensconced inside the alternative venue. The doors were locked, the heaters were on. It was freezing outside, and after about 20 minutes of yelling slogans, the protesters left. In March this year, we toured Vaishnavi Sundar with her documentary Behind the Looking Glass. It was the first time Vaishnavi's documentary highlighting trans widows had been screened in movie theatres. This time, there were no disruptions by protesters. We ran regional meetings earlier this year. At each event, we celebrated the win in the UK Supreme Court by singing "Women's Rights are Human Rights." Later in 2025, we're hosting Helen Joyce. As well as having her speak at meetings, Helen's going to run media workshops for members of the sex realist groups to hone our messages and help us deal with our hostile media environment. In her speech at the 2025 conference, author Renee Gerlich said a women's party would be internationally relevant and make itself redundant if it held to a vision of a world without rape. Renee was one of the first people in New Zealand to write and speak publicly about the conflict between women's rights and trans ideology. She was also the first person to be cancelled for it. The challenge Renee lays down for us as a women's party is to organise and campaign around a vision of a world without rape, a world without violence against women in all its forms. As well as winning and protesting sex-based rights, protecting rather sex-based rights, we're organising, advocating and campaigning for a world in which women and girls are free from discrimination and violence. We speak out about the harms of prostitution, pornography, rough sex and surrogacy, all forms of exploitation of women. Wellington members protested outside corrections headquarters and about men and women's prisons, along with our sisters in Manawahine Kororo. At last week's GPs conference in Christchurch, members lobbied doctors and the Minister of Health about gender affirmative care involving the use of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones to medicalise children experiencing distress. Our authorities have chosen to ignore the findings of the CAS report and promised restrictions on use of puberty blockers have yet to emerge, no doubt due to pressure by the trans industry and the ideologues. In May, our government suddenly announced drastic changes to our pay equity legislation, which they passed under urgency over less than 2 days. This closed off formal avenues for public feedback, including organisations representing women like ourselves. In the introduction to the Declaration of Women's Sex-Based Rights, WDI reaffirms the sex-based rights of women as set out in the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. Our government has failed to fulfil its commitments to CEDAW by denying women in particular the right, quote, to participate in the formulation of government policy and its implementation. The Women's Declaration states, "It has long been understood in the area of human rights that the stereotyped roles of men and women are a fundamental aspect of women's inequality and must be eliminated." In addition, CEDAW reinforces, quote, "the right to equal remuneration, including benefits, and to equal treatment in respect of work of equal value, as well as equality of treatment in the evaluation of quality of work." So any changes to the law which reduced or removed the protections in relation to pay equity would be a breach of CEDAW. 10 former MPs, all women, have formed a People's Select Committee as a form of protest to hear submissions from the people. We have prepared a submission along with more than 1,000 other organisations and individual citizens. And collectively, women's groups, unions, everybody that's concerned about this, including the 180,000 women who have missed out because their claims were extinguished by this act, are going to be marching on September the 20th, which is around our suffrage day. In the 1960s and 70s, feminists envisaged a world in which women were free from exploitation and discrimination. We thought we'd achieved many of our goals. Fast forward to 2025, and we live in a world where women are raped and beaten, usually by men they know, and children are being abused and killed, again, often within their own families. More than ever, it is upon us all to work together to create a world in which women and men, for all our differences, can live in respect and harmony with each other and the environment to protect the future for our children and their children. Such a world is possible. Such a world is worth fighting for. Thank you.